In this module, we are going to discuss the engagement letter, what is required and when it's required. And let me just say at the beginning, regardless, getting an engagement letter, and probably getting it annually, required or not, it's a really good idea. So, as always, we want to be efficient and effective, follow professional standards, and document what we have done properly. Audit Section 210, paragraph 9 says agree the terms. Says with management or those charged with governance. Notwithstanding, my preference is both. Get both the board and management to agree. Sign the engagement letter. What is required, paragraph 10, what to include, there is a list. You may want more. Standard setters occasionally say you might want to include a limitation of liability paragraph. So there are many other paragraphs that you might want to add other than the example provided in standards. And then paragraph 13, in recurring engagements, do we wish to remind, refresh the terms of engagement? The verb here is assess. Do we have to document it? Yes. Paragraph 10 says in writing, so that's not shall document, but document in writing means the same thing. And as I said at the beginning, you would want an engagement letter even if it was not required. When do we get the engagement letter? 210A23, which is application material, not a requirement. It is in the interests of both the entity and the auditor that the auditor sends an engagement letter before commencement of the audit to help avoid misunderstandings. Absolutely agree. Before the first engagement, that is really good advice. It's not required, but my personal opinion is you would always want to do that and have it done before you began the audit to avoid misunderstanding. Absolutely agree. Not required, but absolutely agree. Now, what do we have to document? What do we have to document about the things we did to determine what needed to be in the engagement letter? 230A7 is pretty clear. The existence of a signed engagement letter in the audit file demonstrate that the auditor has agreed the terms of the audit engagement with management or, where appropriate, those charged with governance. The other thing 230A7 says you don't have to document everything. So that's clear too. There are things you're going to have to do to obtain the engagement letter, inquiries you're going to have to make. That you have done that is documented in the engagement letter. And then there's a list. It's a good idea to revise, but do we have to or not? Well, no, we don't have to. If you decide not to revise, then here's a list of things you might want to think about to determine whether that's okay. And we'll go through this list in detail. So your choice is whether or not any of these things have happened. Send out a revised engagement letter to remind the client of the terms of engagement annually, or do all these things and then decide that you don't have to. I think it's simpler just to send out a letter. Now, in the basis for conclusions, the AASB Canada considered that annual reconfirmation of the terms of the engagement and decided that this matter is an operational issue that may be in common practice, but not a requirement that should be in the standards. So it's very clear, not a requirement to do annual reconfirmation, but it's also clear they think it's a really good idea, and I agree with them. What are the rules in a review? Similar, almost the same. There is a list of conditions and preconditions. You would agree the terms with management and those charged with governance, and I'm just going to say from now on both. What to include, it has to be in writing, so you have to do it. The recurring engagement, do you wish to remind? Verb now is evaluate, not assess. I think that means the same thing. Says you might want to think about it. 230A7 then says the same thing. You might not, you may if you want to, and here's some things you might think about. Similar list. We'll go through the list in detail in a few slides. Compilations, 4200, paragraph 24. There are certain inquiries you are supposed to make before you get the first engagement letter. Presumably those are documented in the engagement letter. Paragraph 25, if there are third parties, two important things that the client has to promise that they're going to do. We don't need to know anything about the third parties, but the client has to tell us two things, including that the third parties are okay with the basis of accounting. Paragraph 26 says agree the terms, again, management and those charged with governance. It says in writing, so 26 is not a shall document paragraph, but it effectively is. Paragraph 27, list of things to include, and again says this should be in writing. The 28 is about recurring engagements. The verb is evaluate, kind of the same. 41A is in writing and shall document. So there's basically three places in this section that we're required to get an engagement letter in writing. And A32 gives us a list of things that we might think about as we're trying to decide whether or not we want to remind. Now, what must we document? What does it say shall document, or where does it say in writing the same? So SD shall document IW in writing. In an audit, the first engagement letter, paragraph 10, in writing. In a review, the first engagement letter, paragraph 35, in writing. Compilations, we just talked about that, but 4241A in writing, or rather shall document. So two in writings and one shall document. That's pretty clear. What is the date that the first engagement letter must be dated? Now, both audit and review are suggested that it be obtained prior to. Very good advice. 4226 is a shall, not shall document, but again, good advice to get it before. The verb is assess, evaluate, or evaluate. They're different. I don't think that makes any difference. Is there a reminder date? No. You may, but there is no reminder date. Now, even if these were not shall document, in my personal view, these things are mandatory. It's extraordinarily important that you do this. And extraordinarily important, I think, that you obtain an annual reminder letter. Simpler to obtain a reminder letter than to go through the list of things you have to consider. Just get the reminder letter, then you don't have to do it. Now, when do we want to get a reminder letter? Do we want to get a reminder letter? There is no requirement and there's no date specified, so we have to decide. Now, on one hand, I suppose we don't want to have to resign. It's embarrassing. We can't collect our work in process. That would be particularly problematic for a public company. On the other end of the spectrum, if it's a compilation, oh well, I guess. Now, on the other hand, we could answer all the questions. That's going to be a bunch of work, maybe a day or two, even in a compilation, to figure that out. We may then decide that we're not going to answer all those questions. So when is the best time? And this is going to be an opinion. You can have your opinion. I'll tell you mine. And this is based on the fact that we already have a letter because we have to already have a letter. Now let's compare the three sets of requirements. None are required. These all say you may think about these. So you may think about one or two of them and not the others. You may think of all of them. That's up to you. And I think for an audit, this applies to smaller audits. I think we're probably in a larger audit. I'm going to have to think harder about this. So let's assume this is a smaller audit. When are we going to find this? Well, the first criteria in a review or a compilation that you might consider is, does management misunderstand? Now, I don't know when you're going to find that, and I don't know if you sat down and quizzed management about whether they understood or did not understand the terms of the engagement. Certainly, if you came to that conclusion, you would decide now's the time for a new engagement letter, but I don't know when we would find that, or even if asking questions would find that out. New engagement terms, all three. Clearly, if it becomes apparent that there are new engagement terms, you would get a new letter. When that would happen, don't know. Management change, difficult to figure out perhaps, and you're going to find that out when you're doing it. Ownership change, same, you're going to find it out when you're doing it. Change in the nature or size of the enterprise, particularly in a review and a compilation, management won't know that. Until the financial statements are done, they don't know. So we may be the first people to find that out. Change in the legal requirements, same as new engagement terms. Don't know when we're going to find that. Change in the framework, might find that out before if the client phones us up and says, hey, we're going to IFRS. I guess we'd know that, and we'd probably then, unless the engagement letter was significantly general, we would say, oh, we're going to talk about that. And in a compilation, change in use, seeing we know hardly anything about that anyway, I'm not sure when we'd know that. So other than the fact that we're not sure when these are going to occur, most likely they're going to occur when we're doing the engagement. So we're thinking about the reminder letter. And I think my personal view is I'd like to get one every year. But then the question is, when do we date it, and how do we find out the answers to those questions on the last slide? Now, I think it's something of a continuum, starting from a large public company, $200 billion in revenue, running all the way down to a compilation, presumably that's smaller, though the size of a smaller audit, larger audit, they could mess around, but just for sake of argument. So, large public company, how often are we going to be involved? Continuous, or maybe at least monthly, that we will be doing something, we will be involved. Interim, year-end starts in November and continues into early January. We will have an almost continuous involvement in a large public company. Regulators suggest we meet with the audit committee at least quarterly, so to prepare for that quarterly meeting, we'll have to do something. Will the company's management be sophisticated enough to answer all those questions? Probably yes. And will it probably be pretty easy to get answers? Again, probably yes. We've got a large, sophisticated client with sophisticated management. Though, the time that we will know the most about all of these things is at year end. And we will have evidence, and we will know best at year end. Smaller public company, again, we're probably at least going to be quarterly. Maybe we'll get monthly financial statements to do monthly analytical procedures. Don't know. Again, probably an interim. So will they probably be able to answer yes? Will it probably be relatively easy? Yes. But again, year end, we're going to know the most again. In a larger audit, probably more than once, because we're probably doing a year end. Probably a large audit, they will have sophisticated management. Probably they'll be able to answer. It might be more difficult than in a public company, because public company, there's publicly available information. There's many sources of information. So probably be able to get it. Smaller audit, $1 million in revenue, review, compilation. We tend to deal with these people once a year. We don't tend to have any contact at all between year end and year end. Maybe they'd be able to answer in a smaller audit. In a review or compilation, management just might not understand the questions we were asking them. So I think in a smaller audit, review, and a compilation, it'd be relatively hard to get that answers to those questions, time consuming, and it may not be worth it. But again, in all those circumstances, we know the most at year end. So my view, it's an opinion, there are no rules. best time to get the renewal reminder engagement letter is once a year and at year end. In conclusion, what is required? Is the first engagement letter required? Yes, it is required in all three engagements, either as an in writing or a shall document required. It's required. And is it a good idea? Of course it is. Even if it wasn't required, we'd want to do that. What date is required? Well, there's no required date, but it suggested that it be dated before. I would agree that that's a really good idea. So the first letter is required, date up to us, but doing it before is a good idea. The reminder letter, is it required? No, it's not. It's suggested. Do I think it's a good idea? Yes, of course I think it's a good idea. The date is not mentioned. So that's up to us. And I talked about what the right date might be. That's up to you to decide when the most convenient date is, when you know enough to issue the reminder letter. My view, we know enough, conveniently know enough to issue a reminder letter at year end. So I will then have a practice of report, representation letter, engagement letter, all drafted, all have the same date. Client has to give them back to me before I issue the report. Keep my life simple. Do we have to answer all the questions in the three lists that are provided? Slightly different lists. Well, no, we don't. It's not a requirement. And even if we did decide to answer some of the questions, we could choose not to answer all. No date mentioned. My only view is figuring out which questions to ask, getting management to reply. In a large public company, maybe that would be simple. But I think that's too much work in a smaller audit, a review, or a compilation. As I said on the previous slide, we know the most about clients at year end. There's no requirement for the date we do it, so I'm going to say I'm going to date the reminder letter, same date as the report, rep letter, reminder letter, all the same. So thanks for listening.